The skies over Lancaster County darkened ominously as Clint Eastwood's rental car crawled along the mud-slicked road. At 80 years old, the Hollywood legend had seen his share of storms, but this one felt different, angrier somehow. Through sheets of rain, he spotted a farmhouse, simple, austere, unmistakably Amish. As water rose around his tires, Eastwood made a decision that would alter many lives, including his own. The elderly man who answered his knock stood rigid in suspicion, his weathered face a map of hard-earned wisdom that mirrored Eastwood's own. Neither man could have known that by morning, the farm would be fighting for survival, and unlikely alliances would form in the face of nature's fury. What was it about this particular storm that would forever link an Amish elder and a Hollywood icon? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The summer sun beat down on Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, painting golden hues across the patchwork of immaculately maintained Amish farms. Samuel Lapp, 73 years of age with a beard as white as winter snow, wiped perspiration from his brow as he examined the sky from his farmhouse porch. His calloused hands, badges of honor from decades of honest labor, gripped the wooden railing that he had built with his own father nearly 60 years ago. The weathered oak still stood strong, much like Samuel himself. "Storm's coming," he muttered to no one in particular, though his wife Ruth, 71, heard him as she stepped onto the porch, her simple blue dress and white prayer cap as pristine as when they were first married. "The radio at the Kramers said it might be a bad one," Ruth replied, referring to their English, non-Amish neighbors, who owned modern conveniences like weather radios and telephones. "Dave Kramer mentioned it when he dropped off that order of nails yesterday." Samuel nodded gravely. The Amish didn't indulge in weather forecasts or modern warnings, but they had generations of wisdom in reading natural signs. The stillness in the air, the way the horses were on edge in the barn, the peculiar stacked formation of clouds to the west, all spoke of something more significant than a typical summer thunderstorm. Inside their modest home, the gentle ticking of a wooden wall clock, crafted by Samuel's father in 1944, kept steady time as it had for decades. The intricate timepiece with hand-carved maple leaves adorning its face was among Samuel's most treasured possessions. Not for its monetary value, which would be considerable in the outside world, but for what it represented. Continuity, tradition, craftsmanship passed from father to son. "Jacob should be returning soon," Ruth said, referring to their 18-year-old grandson who lived with them since their son and his wife had moved to an Amish community in Ohio. "He went to help the Yoders with their hay before the rain." "That boy works hard," Samuel acknowledged with the faintest hint of pride, though concern shadowed his eyes. Jacob was in his rumspringa, the Amish coming-of-age period when youth could experience some aspects of the outside world before committing to baptism in the Amish way of life forever. Samuel worried that Jacob's curiosity about the English world might lead him away from their community. As if summoned by their conversation, a horse-drawn buggy appeared on the horizon, driven at a pace just shy of being considered hurried by Amish standards. Jacob, tall and lean with a strength that came from daily farm work, guided the horse expertly toward the farm. "Looks like he's rushing to beat the weather," Ruth observed. The farmhouse stood as it had for generations, a two-story white clapboard structure with a broad front porch and simple functional lines. No electricity lines connected it to the outside world. No satellite dishes or television antennas marred its silhouette. The property stretched across 40 acres of some of Pennsylvania's most fertile soil, with fields of corn, wheat, and tobacco, an apple orchard, a substantial vegetable garden, and pastures for the horses and dairy cows. The outbuildings, a massive red barn, a workshop where Samuel crafted furniture sold to tourists and specialty shops, a washhouse and several storage buildings, formed a practical compound that had supported the Lapp family for generations. The farm operated as it would have a century ago, with horse-drawn plows instead of tractors, oil lamps instead of electric lights, and physical labor instead of automated machinery. "Gross daddy, gross mommy," Jacob called as he secured the horse using the Pennsylvania Dutch terms for grandfather and grandmother. Bishop Miller says we should prepare for high water. The creek's already rising from the rains up north. Samuel frowned at this news. The bishop was their community's religious leader, a man whose judgment was rarely questioned. If Bishop Miller was concerned enough to send warnings, the situation warranted attention. We'll move the livestock to higher ground, Samuel decided, his mind already calculating what needed protection. The hay in the lower field should come in too if there's time. Sarah Yoder came by the Millers while I was there, Jacob added, referring to their neighbor, a widow with 5 children who farmed alone since her husband's passing 2 years earlier. She's worried about her west field. It's already getting soggy. Ruth's face creased with concern. That poor woman has enough burdens without a flood. Perhaps we should send word that we'll help her afterward. We'll see to our farm first, Samuel said firmly, though not unkindly. Then we can assist others as needed. The Lapp farm sat on a gentle rise, with Beaver Creek running along its western boundary. Most years, this positioning protected them from the occasional flooding that affected other farms in the valley. But if Bishop Miller was concerned about high water, it suggested something extraordinary was coming. As Jacob led the horse to the barn, Samuel gazed toward the western horizon. Again, the clouds had darkened considerably in just the past hour, and a distant rumble of thunder confirmed his concerns. This wouldn't be an ordinary storm. Meanwhile, 15 miles away on Route 30, Clint Eastwood sat behind the wheel of a rented Ford Explorer, studying a paper map spread across the steering wheel. At 80 years old, the actor and director remained remarkably spry, his face a landscape of deep lines that tracked a lifetime in the unforgiving California sun. His eyes, as piercing and analytical as they had been in his iconic films, scanned the rural routes of Lancaster County with focused intensity. Should have been a right back there, he muttered to himself, folding the map with practiced precision before making a careful U-turn on the empty country road. Eastwood was scouting locations for a film project, a human drama set in rural America, that required authentic backdrops untouched by modern visual pollution. Lancaster County's Amish country offered exactly the kind of pristine landscapes he envisioned. He had declined assistance or production crews for this preliminary scout, preferring to get his own feel for the land and its people, without the circus that typically accompanied a Hollywood production. The dashboard radio crackled with a weather alert. The National Weather Service has issued a flash flood warning for Lancaster County. A slow-moving storm system combined with already saturated ground conditions could create dangerous flooding in low-lying areas. Rainfall amounts of 4 to 6 inches are expected, with isolated areas potentially receiving up to 8 inches. This is an extremely dangerous situation. Eastwood glanced at the darkening sky with the weathered assessment of someone who had filmed in unpredictable outdoor conditions for decades. He should find a hotel and wait out the storm. But something about the landscape, the rolling hills, the immaculate farms, the lack of power lines and modern intrusions, called to his filmmaker's eye. Just a few more shots before the rain hit in earnest, he turned onto a narrower road, consulting his map again. This route would take him deeper into Amish country, away from the tourist areas and closer to the working farms he wanted to document. The first heavy raindrops began to hit the windshield as he drove, quickly intensifying into a steady downpour that reduced visibility to mere yards. Eastwood drove cautiously, aware that horse-drawn buggies might share these roads even in inclement weather. The Explorer's tires splashed through puddles that were rapidly forming across the asphalt. The windshield wipers worked at maximum speed but could barely keep up with the deluge. Back at the Lapp farm, preparations for the storm were well underway. Samuel, Jacob, and 2 neighbors who had come to help were moving hay bales from the lower field into the barn's upper level. Ruth and Samuel's sister, Miriam, the community midwife, were securing windows and doors while taking inventory of their food supplies. "Samuel," Ruth called from the kitchen doorway, "the rain's starting. You men should come in soon." Samuel nodded acknowledgement, but continued working. The Amish emphasis on community meant that in times of potential crisis, they looked out not only for themselves, but for their neighbors as well. Once their own preparations were complete, Samuel planned to check on Sarah Yoder's farm. located in a lower-lying area more susceptible to flooding. Inside the farmhouse, Ruth wound the wooden wall clock, a daily ritual that had become second nature over decades. The clock had survived countless storms, 2 fires, and the passing of generations. Its steady ticking was a comforting constant in a world that, despite the Amish commitment to simplicity and tradition, seemed to change more rapidly with each passing year. As she performed this ritual, Ruth reflected on her life with Samuel. 52 years of marriage had worn smooth the rough edges of their personalities. Like river stones polished by decades of flowing water, they had raised 7 children to adulthood, buried 2 in infancy, and now enjoyed the presence of 34 grandchildren, though Jacob was the only one living with them currently. The rain intensified, drumming on the metal roof with increasing urgency. Through the window, Ruth could see the men making final preparations in the barn, their black broadcloth coats darkened by the downpour. Samuel's distinctive white beard made him easily identifiable even through the rain-blurred glass. "They'll be soaked through," Miriam commented, setting a pot of coffee on the wood-burning stove. At 68, Miriam moved with the deliberate efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime in service to others as the community's midwife and healer. "I've set out dry clothes for all of them," Ruth replied, "and there's stew keeping warm." The sound of horses whinnying nervously from the barn cut through the rain noise. Animals often sensed danger before humans, and their distress registered with both women immediately. "I don't like the sound of that," Miriam said, moving to the window. The creek must be rising faster than Samuel expected. On the road approaching the Lapp farm, Clint Eastwood faced a worsening situation. What had begun as heavy rain had transformed into a genuine deluge. Water coursed across the road in sheets, and twice already he had felt the Explorer's tires lose traction on submerged sections of asphalt. A flash of lightning illuminated the landscape, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder that suggested the storm was directly overhead. In that brief moment of electric clarity, Eastwood saw that the road ahead disappeared under what looked like a rushing stream. "Damn," he muttered, braking carefully and assessing his options. Turning around meant navigating back through areas that were already flooding. Continuing forward seemed equally ill-advised. Consulting his map again, he noted a farm entrance about a quarter-mile ahead, on slightly higher ground. Perhaps they would let him wait out the worst of the storm. As Eastwood inched the Explorer forward, the vehicle suddenly lurched sideways as a rush of water from a field drainage pipe undercut part of the roadbed. Fighting the steering wheel, with strength that belied his age, he managed to keep the SUV from sliding into the ditch but found himself at an awkward angle, partly off the pavement with one wheel spinning in mud. After several careful attempts to extricate the vehicle, Eastwood accepted that he was stuck, at least until the rain subsided or help arrived. Neither seemed imminent. Gathering his weatherproof jacket from the passenger seat, he prepared to make a dash for the farm he had spotted. At precisely the moment Clint Eastwood stepped out of his stranded rental car, Samuel Lapp was securing the barn doors against the intensifying storm. Looking up through the curtain of rain, he noticed headlights on the road and then saw they weren't moving. An English vehicle was stuck near his property. Samuel hesitated. The Amish were known for their hospitality, but they were also private people who maintained careful separation from the outside world. Still, denying help to someone in distress went against both his Christian values and practical rural ethics. "Jacob," he called to his grandson, "someone's stranded on the road. We should see if they need assistance." The young man nodded, and, together they set out through the downpour, heads bowed against the stinging rain. They had covered about half the distance when they made out a tall figure trudging toward them, an elderly man with a distinctive lean build that struck both Amish men as vaguely familiar, though neither could immediately place why. "Your vehicle is stuck?" Samuel asked as they approached, raising his voice above the storm's roar. Clint Eastwood nodded, water streaming from his rain-slicked hair. "Roads washing out. Wondered if I might wait at your place until it passes." Something in the man's voice, its gravelly timbre and measured cadence, triggered a distant memory for Samuel, but he pushed it aside to address the immediate situation. "Yeah, come. We have dry space and hot food," Samuel offered, gesturing toward the farmhouse. As the 3 men made their way to the house, The wind intensified, bending the tops of the corn in the nearby field and sending a trash can tumbling across the yard. Samuel cast a worried glance toward the creek, visible now as a brown, churning mass that had already breached its banks in the lower section of the property. Inside, Ruth and Miriam looked up in surprise as Samuel and Jacob ushered in a soaking, wet stranger. Despite his drenched state, there was an undeniable dignity to the tall, lean visitor, something in his carriage and the direct assessment of his gaze that commanded attention. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name, Samuel realized. Clint Eastwood, the visitor replied simply, removing his dripping jacket. A moment of stunned silence fell over the room. Even in their deliberately isolated community, the Amish recognized certain names from the outside world. Clint Eastwood was among them. Ruth recovered first, her innate hospitality overriding surprise. You're soaked through, Mr. Eastwood. I'll find you some dry clothes while yours dry by the stove. Just Clint is fine, he responded with a nod of thanks. Samuel found himself studying their unexpected guest with new interest. The Amish did not watch films, but news of the outside world filtered in through various interactions with English neighbors, customers who purchased their furniture and produce, and the occasional newspaper that made its way into their community. Eastwood's name was associated with westerns and tough guy roles that held little appeal for the pacifist Amish, but he was nonetheless recognized as a significant figure in American culture. You're a long way from Hollywood, Samuel observed as Ruth returned with a set of plain clothes, likely belonging to their son who was of similar height to their visitor. Scouting locations, Eastwood explained, accepting the clothes with a grateful nod. Looking for places that feel authentic, untouched by time. A faint smile crossed his weathered face. Guess I found one. As their visitor went to change in the adjacent room, the family exchanged glances. Having a famous English movie star in their home during what was shaping up to be a significant natural disaster was outside any experience they had prepared for. The creek's rising fast, Jacob reported, peering out the window. It's already up to the lower field fence. Samuel moved to join him, concern etching deeper lines into his already weathered face. In 50 years on this farm, he had seen the creek overflow its banks perhaps a dozen times, but rarely with such rapid ferocity. The rain showed no signs of abating, drumming on the roof with a steady intensity that had grown from merely loud to genuinely concerning. When Eastwood returned, dressed incongruously in typical Amish attire, black pants and a blue shirt, the transformation was remarkable. Without his modern clothes and with his lean, angular build, he might almost have passed for Amish himself, save for his closely cropped hair and clean-shaven face. Mr. Eastwood, Clint, Samuel corrected himself. We may have a situation developing. The storm is causing the creek to rise faster than usual. Call me Clint, Eastwood repeated, moving to the window to assess the situation with the practiced eye of someone who had filmed in challenging environmental conditions for decades. How high has it gotten in previous floods? Once, in 72, it reached the workshop, Samuel replied, pointing to a building about 50 yards from the house. But that was Hurricane Agnes. Most years it doesn't come past the lower field. Eastwood nodded, processing this information. And your house? Barn, they're on high enough ground? The house, yes, the barn. Samuel hesitated. The barn's floor is about 2 feet above the 72 flood level. But this storm... He left the implication hanging. A crash of thunder punctuated his words, followed by a flicker of lightning that briefly illuminated the entire landscape. In that flash, they could all see that Beaver Creek had transformed from a gentle stream into a raging torrent that had already consumed the lower field entirely. Do you have neighbors in lower-lying areas? Eastwood asked, his mind already shifting. To broader concerns, Sarah Yoder, Jacob interjected. Her farm sits in the bottom, and she's alone with 5 Kender children, he clarified for Eastwood's benefit. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Bishop Miller stood on the porch, water streaming from his broad-brimmed black hat. Behind him, 2 more community members waited in a buggy. Samuel, the bishop greeted solemnly. The elders are meeting at the Stoltzfus farm to coordinate our response. The English authorities have declared an emergency evacuation for the valley. Samuel introduced their unusual guest with simple dignity. The bishop acknowledged Eastwood with a respectful nod but remained focused on the crisis at hand. "We're gathering the community at the schoolhouse on the ridge," Bishop Miller continued. "It's the highest ground with sufficient space for everyone." "Sarah, Yoder?" Samuel asked immediately. "Daniel Byler has gone to help her family," the bishop assured him. "But we need every able-bodied man to assist with evacuating the lower farms and moving livestock." Samuel turned to his wife. "Ruth, you and Miriam should go with the bishop to the schoolhouse. Jacob and I will secure what we can here and then join the evacuation efforts." Ruth's expression showed her reluctance to leave, but she understood the wisdom in the plan. The schoolhouse would indeed be safer if the flooding worsened. "What about Mr. Eastwood?" she asked. All eyes turned to their famous visitor, who had been quietly assessing the situation. "I'll stay and help," Eastwood said, simply. When he saw Samuel about to object, he added, "I've worked through worse conditions on film sets, and an extra pair of hands never hurts." The bishop studied the Hollywood director with thoughtful consideration. The Amish were generally wary of outside involvement in their affairs, preferring to handle crises within their community. But these were extraordinary circumstances. "We welcome your assistance," Bishop Miller finally said. "But please understand our ways may be different from what you're accustomed to." Eastwood nodded. "I'm here to help, not direct," he replied, the faint trace of a smile acknowledging his profession. With arrangements settled, Ruth and Miriam quickly packed essential supplies: food, medical materials, extra clothing, and kerosene for lamps. Within minutes they were ready to depart with the bishop. As Samuel helped his wife into the waiting buggy, Ruth squeezed his hand. "Be careful," she whispered. 52 years of marriage conveying volumes in those two simple words. "We'll be fine," Samuel assured her. "Look after the others at the school." As the buggy pulled away, disappearing into the rain-swept night, Samuel turned back to face his grandson and their unexpected ally. The wooden clock on the wall struck 9, its chimes nearly lost in the storm's fury. "We should check the barn first," Samuel decided. "Then we'll see about the workshop and storage buildings." Outside, the rain had, if anything, intensified. The three men dashed toward the barn, water already ankle-deep in parts of the yard. Inside, the horses whinnied nervously, sensing the danger that humans could only measure. "We should move them to higher ground," Jacob suggested. Samuel nodded agreement. "The north pasture, it's on the rise." As they began preparing the horses, a tremendous crash from outside sent them rushing to the barn door. In the darkness, illuminated only by their lanterns and occasional lightning flashes, they saw that a massive section of the creek bank had collapsed, sending a new surge of water across the lower fields and accelerating the flooding. "That changes things," Eastwood observed grimly. "Water's coming up faster now." Samuel made a rapid assessment. "We need to get the horses out immediately. Then we'll check on the Yoder farm. If Daniel Byler hasn't reached them yet, they'll be in serious trouble now." As they worked to lead the nervous horses to safety, the three men, an Amish elder, his grandson, and a Hollywood icon, found themselves forming an unlikely but effective team. Eastwood moved with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to high-pressure situations, following Samuel's lead, but anticipating needs without having to be told. By the time they had secured the horses in the north pasture, water was steadily rising around the barn's foundation. The workshop, containing Samuel's livelihood of handcrafted furniture and tools passed down through generations, stood directly in the water's projected path. "We should try to save what we can from the workshop," Samuel decided, his voice betraying rare emotion at the potential loss of his life's work. But as they turned in that direction, a call carried across the flooded fields, a woman's voice, desperate and terrified. "Help! Please, someone help us!" In the distance, barely visible through the sheets of rain, a lantern light bobbed frantically. It came from the direction of the Yoder farm. Without hesitation, all three men changed course, wading through increasingly deep water toward the cry for help. The night had only just begun, and the storm was far from over. Artifact. Eastwood's old compass a military-issue compass Eastwood carries from his Army service days, which becomes crucial for navigation during the rescue operations when all familiar landmarks are obscured by floodwaters. The rain hammered against their bodies as Samuel, Jacob, and Clint Eastwood slogged through the rising waters toward the desperate cries. What had once been a clear path between the Lapp and Yoder farms was now a treacherous expanse of muddy current, punctuated by partially submerged fence posts and debris swept along by the flood. "Sarah," Samuel called out, his voice nearly lost in the storm's cacophony. "Sarah Yoder." The bobbing lantern light paused its frantic movement, then began approaching them. Gradually, a figure materialized through the curtain of rain. Sarah Yoder, her simple dress soaked and muddied, her prayer cap plastered against her head by the downpour. At 38, Sarah carried herself with the dignity of someone who had faced hardship head-on, but tonight terror had stripped away that composure. "Samuel, oh thank God," she gasped as she reached them. "The water came so fast we couldn't. My youngest two are still in the house." Her words tumbled out between ragged breaths. "Daniel Byler came, but he's trapped too. The water rose behind him after he entered." "Where are your other children?" Samuel asked urgently. "In the hayloft with Daniel. We thought the house was safer for the little ones, but then the first floor started flooding," Sarah explained, clutching Samuel's arm. "I tried to go back, but the current, I couldn't make it." Eastwood had been scanning the landscape, mentally mapping the flood pattern based on the terrain he could discern through the darkness. "Which direction is the house?" he asked calmly. Sarah pointed into the darkness where, faintly, the outline of a two-story farmhouse was just visible. Even from this distance, they could see water had already engulfed the first floor. "How old are the children still inside?" Eastwood asked. "Mary is 6, Eli just 4, Sarah replied, her voice breaking. "They're upstairs, but I'm afraid if the water keeps rising." The unspoken fear hung in the air. None of them needed to articulate what would happen if the floodwaters reached the second floor before the children were rescued. "The barn?" Samuel inquired. "That way," Sarah pointed in another direction. "About 100 yards from the house. The water's nearly to the hayloft now. My 3 older children and Daniel are trapped there." Jacob surveyed the rushing water with growing alarm. "Gross, Daddy, this is worse than 72. The creeks joined with the runoff from the northern hills." Samuel nodded grimly. In all his years, he had never seen flooding occur so rapidly. Hurricane Agnes had caused devastating damage, but its flooding had developed over days. This was happening in hours. "We need rope," Eastwood said decisively, "and boards, anything that floats." The practical suggestion cut through the moment of overwhelmed assessment. Samuel turned to his grandson. "Jacob, run back to our farm. In the workshop there's coiled rope hanging on the east wall, and the lumber pile might have boards we can use." "I'll be quick," Jacob promised, already turning back toward higher ground. "Wait," Eastwood called. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a weathered brass compass. "The way the water's rising, landmarks might be hard to see on your way back. Use this." Jacob accepted the compass with surprise. "I know these lands well, but danke, thank you," he acknowledged, recognizing the wisdom in the precaution. As Jacob splashed away toward the Lapp farm, Samuel and Eastwood turned their attention back to the immediate crisis. "My husband would have known what to do," Sarah said softly, the ache of her loss evident even amidst the current emergency. Elam Yoder had been killed 2 years earlier when his buggy was struck by a speeding truck on Route 30, a tragedy that had left Sarah to manage both farm and family alone. "We'll get them out," Samuel assured her with more confidence than he felt. "All of them." Eastwood had been studying the farmhouse, noting how the water flowed around it. "The current's strongest on the east side," he observed. "If we approach from the west, we'll have better chances." Samuel looked at the Hollywood director with newfound respect. Beneath the celebrity status was clearly a man who understood practical problems. "You've done this before?" he asked. "Military training," Eastwood replied simply. "And some film shoots in rough conditions. Water always follows the same rules." They didn't have to wait long for Jacob's return. The young man emerged from the darkness carrying a coil of sturdy rope over one shoulder and dragging several planks from Samuel's lumber pile. "The waters reached the workshop," Jacob reported breathlessly. "I grabbed what I could before it started coming through the door." Samuel felt a pang at this news. Decades of craftsmanship potentially ruined, but pushed the thought aside. Lives were at stake. "We'll try for the house first," he decided. "The children there are in more immediate danger." Using the planks and rope, they quickly constructed a makeshift raft, not meant to be a boat, but rather a floating platform to help them maintain stability against the current. Eastwood demonstrated a sailor's knot that held the construction together with surprising strength. "I'll go," Jacob volunteered immediately. "No," Samuel and Eastwood said in unison. "I'm the youngest and strongest swimmer," Jacob protested. "And the lightest," Eastwood pointed out. "That raft needs weight to stay stable in this current." Samuel looked at the Hollywood director with surprise. "You're suggesting you go?" "I grew up swimming in the ocean," Eastwood said with the faintest smile. "This is just moving water." The simple understatement made in the face of genuinely life-threatening conditions struck Samuel as remarkable. This man, known to millions for portraying tough, laconic characters, apparently embodied some of those same qualities in real life. "We'll both go," Samuel decided. "Sarah can direct us to the right window, and Jacob can manage the guide rope from here." After some brief debate, the plan was settled, as Samuel and Eastwood would use the raft to battle their way to the farmhouse, while Jacob maintained a rope connected to the craft, creating a lifeline back to relatively solid ground. Sarah would direct them to the upstairs room where her children were trapped. "They're in the east bedroom," Sarah explained, wringing her hands. "The window faces this direction." Before pushing off into the flood, Samuel turned to Eastwood. "This isn't your fight," he said quietly. "You have no obligation to risk yourself for our community." Eastwood's weathered face revealed little emotion, but his eyes, keen and direct, held Samuel's gaze steadily. "When someone needs help, it's everyone's fight," he replied. With Jacob and Sarah holding the guide rope, Samuel and Eastwood pushed their makeshift raft into the churning waters. The current immediately grabbed the flat construction, trying to twist it sideways. Both men dropped to their knees, using planks as makeshift paddles to maintain control and direction. The distance to the Yoder farmhouse couldn't have been more than 70 yards, but through the floodwaters, it might as well have been miles. Every foot required careful navigation around submerged obstacles and compensation for the current's unpredictable tugs. The rain continued to lash at them, reducing visibility to mere yards and making communication nearly impossible except through shouted single-word commands. Halfway to the house, their progress was nearly halted when the raft became entangled in a submerged barbed wire fence. The sharp barbs snagged the wooden planks, threatening to tear the construction apart. "Hold steady," Eastwood instructed, producing a pocket knife from his borrowed pants. With methodical precision, he leaned over the edge of the raft, working underwater to cut the wire strands one by one. Each cut released some tension, but also caused the raft to shift precariously in the current. Samuel, watching this display of calm competence, felt a growing appreciation for their unlikely ally. When the last wire was cut, and the raft lurched free, Samuel steadied Eastwood with a firm hand on his shoulder, a gesture of silent thanks that required no words. Finally, they reached the farmhouse. The water had now risen halfway up the first-floor windows, and the current swirled around the building with frightening force. Using the rope as an anchor point, they worked their way around to the east side of the house. "Mary, Eli," Samuel called upward toward the second-story windows. For a terrifying moment, there was no response. Then a small face appeared at one of the windows. A little girl with eyes wide with fear. "Help!" she cried. "The water's coming up the stairs." This alarming news accelerated their efforts. Working quickly, they positioned the raft beneath the window. The height was problematic, a good 12 feet from the surface of the floodwater to the windowsill. "We need to get up there," Samuel muttered, assessing the situation. Eastwood studied the exterior of the farmhouse. There, he pointed to a drain pipe that ran from the roof to the ground. If one of us can climb that, we can pass a rope through the window. The pipe looked dubiously rickety for supporting a man's weight, particularly in these conditions. Before Samuel could volunteer, Eastwood had already slipped the rope around his waist. "Hold the raft steady," he instructed Samuel. Despite his 80 years, Clint Eastwood began climbing the drainpipe with the deliberate movements of someone who understood that speed mattered less than security. Hand over hand, foot by careful foot, he ascended toward the window where the little girl watched with a mixture of fear and hope. Reaching the window, Eastwood braced himself against the house's exterior and signaled for the child to open it. When she struggled with the latch, he talked her through it with patient, clear instructions. "That's it, now push up." "Good girl." With the window open, Eastwood could see both children huddled together. Mary protectively holding her younger brother, Eli, whose tear-streaked face reflected the terror of their situation. "It's going to be okay," Eastwood assured them with the same calm confidence he might use directing actors through a difficult scene. "We're going to get you out of here." Eastwood secured one end of the rope to a sturdy piece of furniture inside the room, then tossed the other end down to Samuel on the raft. "I'll lower them to you one at a time," he called above the storm's roar. The little boy, Eli, began crying harder at the prospect of being sent out the window. Mary, showing remarkable composure for a 6-year-old, whispered reassurances to him. "You're being very brave," Eastwood told her, his voice gentle but firm. "Both of you are. Your mother is waiting, and we need to hurry." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. With practiced efficiency, Eastwood fashioned a harness from the rope, creating a secure cradle for the children. Mary allowed herself to be fitted into this improvised device first, understanding instinctively that successfully demonstrating the process would help her frightened brother. "I'm going to lower you down to that man on the raft," Eastwood explained. "He's Mr. Lapp. Do you know him?" Mary nodded. "He makes furniture for my mother." "That's right, and he's going to catch you and keep you safe." As Eastwood began lowering the girl through the window, Samuel positioned himself on the raft, arms upraised to receive her. The operation was precarious. The raft shifted unpredictably in the current, and the rain made the rope slippery and difficult to manage. Nevertheless, through careful coordination, Mary descended safely into Samuel's waiting arms. As soon as she was secure, Samuel untied her and prepared the rope to be pulled back up for Eli. The process proved more challenging with the 4-year-old boy. Terrified and unwilling to be separated from his sister, Eli clung to the window frame, refusing the harness. Inside the room, Eastwood could hear an ominous sound beneath the storm's noise, water lapping at the staircase beginning to spill onto the second floor. Time was running dangerously short. Drawing on decades of experience calming nervous actors before difficult stunts, Eastwood knelt to the boy's level. "Eli, look at me," he said, his voice taking on the quiet authority that had commanded film sets for generations. "Your sister is waiting for you down there. She needs you to be brave right now." The boy's sobbing quieted as he looked into Eastwood's steady gaze. "I'm scared," he whispered. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Eastwood told him. "It means doing what needs to be done even when you are scared." This simple wisdom, delivered with grandfatherly gentleness, seemed to reach the child. Eli allowed Eastwood to secure him in the rope harness, though he maintained a death grip on the man's arm until the last possible moment. "That's it. You're doing great," Eastwood encouraged, as he began lowering the boy through the window. Below, Samuel and Mary watched Eli's descent with tense anticipation. When a sudden shift in the current caused the raft to lurch sideways, Samuel had to make a split-second adjustment, lunging to catch the boy while maintaining enough balance to keep them all from tipping into the floodwaters. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed the rescue might fail. Then Samuel's strong hands closed around Eli's small form, pulling him safely onto the raft as the rope slackened from above. "We've got him," Samuel called up to Eastwood, who nodded acknowledgement. Now came the challenge of Eastwood's own descent. The drain pipe that had supported his climb was now visibly loose from the house's exterior. pulled away by the force of the floodwaters attacking the foundation. Using the rope, Eastwood began a controlled descent from the window. Halfway down, a thunderous crack signaled disaster as a section of the house's water-weakened siding gave way, taking the drainpipe with it. Eastwood found himself suddenly dangling from the rope, swinging precariously above the churning waters. Samuel handed the children to the far side of the raft and positioned himself to assist Eastwood, who was now descending hand over hand down the rope. When he was close enough, Samuel reached up and helped guide him onto the raft, which sank noticeably lower in the water under the additional weight. "Let's get back," Samuel said urgently, noting how the raft's edge was now barely above the floodwater's surface. The return journey proved even more treacherous than the approach. With 4 people now weighing down the makeshift craft, its stability was compromised. Additionally, the flood level had risen further during their rescue operation, submerging new obstacles and strengthening the current. Samuel and Eastwood worked in synchronized effort, using the guide rope to pull themselves back toward Jacob and Sarah. The 2 men found an unspoken rhythm, anticipating each other's movements with the harmony of those who share a common purpose. When they finally reached the relative safety of higher ground, Sarah engulfed her children in a desperate, embraced sobbing words of thanks and relief. Mary and Eli, wet and frightened but unharmed, clung to their mother with equal fervor. There was little time for celebration, however. The barn where Sarah's other children and Daniel Beeler remained trapped was still in danger, with water continuing to rise around it. The barn next, Samuel decided, looking toward the dark shape barely visible through the rain. Eastwood nodded agreement, wringing water from his soaked clothing. Despite his age and the exertion of the first rescue, he showed no signs of flagging. His eyes remained alert, his movements purposeful. "The raft won't work for that distance," Jacob assessed, pointing out how the floodwaters had formed what amounted to a lake between their position and the barn. "And the current's too strong now." "What about the Miller's rowboat?" Sarah suggested. "They keep it at their fishing pond, just up the hill from here." It was decided that Jacob would make the run for the boat while the others recovered and planned the next phase of the rescue. The young man sprinted off into the darkness, Eastwood's compass clutched in his hand to guide his return. While they waited, Samuel found himself studying their famous helper with new eyes. Clint Eastwood, the man whose tough guy image was known worldwide, had just risked his life without hesitation for children he had never met, in a community far removed from his Hollywood world. The act revealed character that went beyond the persona. "You didn't have to do that," Samuel said quietly, as they stood watching the floodwaters rise around the distant barn. Eastwood's expression remained impassive, rain streaming down his lined face. "Yes, I did." The simplicity of the response struck Samuel deeply. In those 3 words, he recognized a code of personal ethics that, despite their vastly different lifestyles and beliefs, he understood completely. Sarah approached, having settled her 2 younger children under a makeshift shelter fashioned from a tarp pulled across bushes. "I can never repay you," she said, addressing both men but looking particularly at Eastwood. "My children's lives. No repayment necessary," Eastwood replied. A distant shout announced Jacob's return. The young man appeared through the rain, dragging a small wooden rowboat behind him. Another figure accompanied him. Bishop Miller, who had apparently returned from the schoolhouse evacuation site. "Samuel," the bishop greeted gravely, "the situation is worsening throughout the valley. The English authorities have equipment trying to reach the lower areas, but they're hampered by road washouts." As they prepared the rowboat for the rescue of those trapped in the barn, Bishop Miller observed Eastwood with interest. Clearly, Jacob had updated him on the Hollywood director's unexpected assistance. "Mr. Eastwood," the bishop acknowledged with formal courtesy, "our community appreciates your help in this crisis." Eastwood nodded in response, already helping Samuel check the rowboat for damage and stability. With the boat deemed seaworthy, Samuel, Eastwood, and Jacob prepared to set out for the barn. The craft could safely hold 5 people, just enough for the 3 of them plus Daniel Beeler and 1 child per trip. That meant multiple journeys would be necessary to rescue everyone. I should come too, Sarah insisted. My children will be frightened. They'll be more frightened if something happens to you on the way. Samuel countered gently. Stay with Mary and Eli. They need their mother. Bishop Miller placed a steadying hand on Sarah's shoulder. I'll remain here as well. We can prepare dry clothing and blankets for when they return. Thus decided, the rescue party set off into the flood. Samuel and Jacob took the oars while Eastwood positioned himself in the bow, a lantern held high to illuminate their path through the darkness. The rain had finally begun to slacken, but the wind remained fierce, whipping the surface of the floodwaters into choppy waves that rocked the small boat precariously. As they rowed, Eastwood extracted something from his pocket, a small leather case that had somehow remained relatively dry despite their earlier immersion. From it, he removed a silver whistle. Military issue, he explained briefly. Carries farther than voice, especially over water. He blew 3 sharp blasts on the whistle, then waited. After a moment, an answering light appeared in the hayloft window of the barn, someone waving a lantern to guide them. The approach to the barn proved difficult. Debris carried by the flood, fence posts, tree branches, even what looked like part of a chicken coop, created a hazardous obstacle course. Several times they had to change course to avoid collision with particularly large objects. Reaching the barn at last, they found that the water had risen well into the structure. Only the upper half remained above the flood, with the hayloft serving as the last refuge. A window at loft level provided their access point. Daniel Byler's relieved face appeared at the opening. A solid, practical man in his 40s, Daniel was one of the community's deacons and a skilled carpenter who had often worked with Samuel on larger projects. "Samuel, thank God," he called down. "The water came so fast we barely made it up here before the first floor was submerged." "How many?" Samuel called back. "5, myself and Sarah's 3 older children," Daniel replied. The oldest boy, John, tried to swim to get help earlier, but the current was too strong. He made it back, but he's injured his arm. This news added urgency to their mission. With Jacob steadying the boat beneath the hayloft window, Samuel and Eastwood coordinated the evacuation. 14-year-old John, cradling what appeared to be a broken arm, was helped down first, followed by his 10-year-old sister Hannah. "We'll come back for the others," Samuel explained as they carefully settled the children in the boat. "It's too dangerous to overload." Daniel nodded, understanding. He and 8-year-old Aaron would wait for the boat's return. The journey back proved even more hazardous than the approach. The added weight made the boat sit lower in the water, reducing their clearance over submerged obstacles. At one point, they scraped across what felt like a fence, the impact nearly capsizing them. Eastwood, with reflexes that belied his age, shifted his weight to counterbalance the tilt while helping John steady himself. "Easy," he murmured to the frightened boy. "We've got you." John, despite his pain, looked at Eastwood with sudden recognition. You're him, aren't you?" From the movies? It was the first acknowledgement of Eastwood's celebrity status since the crisis began, and it struck an almost comical note in the midst of their dire situation. Samuel found himself suppressing an unexpected urge to smile. Eastwood merely nodded. "Let's get you to safety, then maybe we can talk movies." When they finally reached the meeting point, Sarah embraced her injured son and daughter with the same desperate relief she had shown earlier. Bishop Miller immediately examined John's arm, confirming it was indeed broken, but making a temporary splint to stabilize it until proper medical attention could be obtained. "The water's still rising," Jacob reported after checking the flood markers they had established earlier. "We need to hurry for the second trip." Leaving the children in Sarah and Bishop Miller's care, the 3 rescuers set out again into the flooded darkness. The rain had finally stopped, but the wind continued to gust unpredictably, creating swells on the floodwater's surface that challenged their navigation. When they reached the barn again, an alarming sight greeted them. In the time they had been gone, the water had risen another foot, now threatening the hayloft itself. Daniel was at the window, 8-year-old Aaron clutched tightly in his arms. "Hurry," Daniel called. "The floor's starting to give way." As if to confirm his warning, a cracking sound emanated from within the barn, the structure's waterlogged timbers beginning to fail under the relentless pressure. Jacob positioned the boat as close as possible to the hayloft window. Daniel handed Aaron down first, the child's eyes wide with terror but his movements obedient and careful. Once the boy was safely in the boat with Samuel and Eastwood, Daniel prepared to make his own exit. At that moment, disaster struck. With a thunderous crack, a major support beam within the barn collapsed, sending the entire hayloft floor tilting precipitously. Daniel lost his footing and disappeared from the window with a shout of alarm. "Daniel," Samuel called. "Can you hear me?" There was no response. Without hesitation, Eastwood stood in the boat, quickly removing his borrowed shirt. "Hold steady," he instructed Jacob, then dove through the hayloft window into the partially collapsed structure. Samuel and Jacob exchanged horrified glances, both recognizing the extreme danger of entering the failing building. The boat rocked violently from Eastwood's departure and they struggled to maintain position beneath the window. Inside the barn, Eastwood found himself in near total darkness. The lantern they had left with Daniel had extinguished in the collapse, and the only illumination came from the faint light filtering through the hayloft window. The air was thick with dust from disturbed hay and the smell of sodden wood. "Daniel!" he called, orienting himself on the tilted floor. A groan from the far corner answered him. Following the sound, Eastwood carefully picked his way across the destabilized hayloft. Each step produced ominous creaks from the floorboards beneath him. He found Daniel partially pinned under a fallen beam, conscious but clearly in pain. The Amish man looked up with surprise at his unlikely rescuer. "My leg," Daniel gasped. "I can't move it." Eastwood assessed the situation rapidly. The beam wasn't crushingly heavy, but it had Daniel effectively trapped. Using techniques learned during his military service decades earlier, Eastwood leveraged his body against the beam, gradually shifting it enough for Daniel to pull himself free. "Can you stand?" Eastwood asked, offering his arm for support. Daniel tried, but his leg buckled beneath him. "Broken, I think," he grimaced. Another cracking sound, louder and more urgent than before, signaled that their time was running dangerously short. "Put your arm around my shoulders," Eastwood instructed. Despite the 30-year age difference between them, the Hollywood director displayed surprising strength as he helped Daniel hobble toward the window. Outside, Samuel and Jacob watched the window anxiously, the boat rocking beneath them in the agitated floodwaters. Just as they were about to give up hope, Eastwood's voice called from the darkness, "Ready to receive him." Daniel appeared at the window, clearly injured but alive. With careful coordination between all of them, the Amish deacon was transferred from the collapsing barn into the waiting boat. "Eastwood," Daniel began, looking back toward the window. "Coming," came the response. And moments later, Eastwood emerged, sliding through the opening just as another section of the interior collapsed behind him. His timing couldn't have been more precise. As Eastwood landed in the boat, the entire barn shuddered, then began a slow, inexorable collapse in on itself. The structure that had stood for over a century surrendered to the flood, disappearing beneath the waters with a final groan of timber. The return journey was made in grim silence, each man aware of how narrowly they had escaped disaster. Daniel's leg required constant stabilization, and the boat rode dangerously low in the water with 5 occupants. When they finally reached safety, they found that more community members had gathered at their impromptu base. Families evacuated from other low-lying farms who had heard of Samuel and Eastwood's rescue efforts. As Daniel was tended to by those with medical knowledge, including Miriam, who had returned from the schoolhouse when the rain stopped, Samuel found a moment to approach. Eastwood, the Hollywood director, was standing slightly apart from the group, wringing water from his borrowed shirt before putting it back on. "That was either very brave or very foolish," Samuel said quietly. Eastwood glanced at him, a hint of his famous half-smile appearing briefly. "Sometimes there's not much difference between the two." Before Samuel could respond, Bishop Miller approached them. "The English Emergency Services have established a shelter at the high school in town. They have medical facilities for the injured. We should move everyone there before the flood cuts off the last road." This practical suggestion spurred immediate action. The Amish families quickly organized themselves, helping the injured and ensuring children were accounted for. Traditional buggies were impractical in these conditions, so those who had come in vehicles offered space to others. Sarah Yoder approached Eastwood as they prepared to depart. All 5 of her children were now safely gathered around her, including young John with his makeshift splint. "Mr. Eastwood," she said softly, "there are no words. No need for words," he interrupted gently. "Our ways teach us to avoid pride and celebrity," she continued. "But tonight I am grateful that God sent someone with your particular skills to help us." Eastwood accepted this with a simple nod, uncomfortable with explicit gratitude yet clearly moved by the sincerity behind it. As the group made their way toward the evacuation point, Samuel fell into step beside their unlikely ally. The Knights. Events had forged a connection between them that transcended their vastly different worlds. "You mentioned military training earlier," Samuel noted. "You served?" "Army, drafted during Korea," Eastwood confirmed briefly. "Never saw combat. Served as a swimming instructor at Fort Ord." Samuel absorbed this information thoughtfully. "Yet you kept the skills all these years." "Some things you don't forget," Eastwood replied. Then after a pause, "Like how it feels to need help and receive it from strangers." There was something in his tone that suggested a deeper story, but before Samuel could inquire further, they were interrupted by Jacob, who had been scouting ahead. "The road to town is still passable," the young man reported. "But there's a section that's starting to wash out. We should hurry." As they continued their journey toward the evacuation center, the first hint of dawn appeared on the eastern horizon. A faint lightening of the sky that promised the storm had finally passed, though its consequences would remain for days to come. The compass in Jacob's pocket, borrowed from Eastwood hours earlier, had guided them faithfully through the night's darkness. None of them could know yet how significantly their paths had been altered by this chance convergence of lives during a single catastrophic storm. Artifact: Samuel's damaged clock. The wooden clock, damaged in the flood, now stuck at the exact time the storm hit, serving as a physical reminder of the moment everything changed. The Lancaster County High School gymnasium had been transformed into an emergency shelter overnight. Red Cross volunteers moved efficiently between clusters of displaced families, distributing blankets, food, and basic medical supplies. The facility's fluorescent lighting cast an institutional pallor over the scene, starkly different from the oil lamps and natural light the Amish families were accustomed to. Samuel Lapp sat on a folding chair near one wall, watching as his community navigated this unfamiliar environment. Despite Bishop Miller's initial reluctance to accept English assistance, practical necessity had prevailed. John Yoder's broken arm and Daniel Beeler's fractured leg required proper medical attention, and many of the children showed signs of exposure after hours in the storm. Ruth approached, carrying 2 steaming paper cups. "They're calling it coffee," she said with gentle humor, offering one to her husband. "Though I have my doubts." Samuel accepted the cup gratefully. His hands, still bearing the calluses of decades of craftsmanship, trembled slightly with exhaustion. Neither he nor Ruth had slept in over 24 hours. "Any word about our farm?" he asked. Ruth shook her head. "Jacob went with some of the younger men to check several properties, including ours. They haven't returned yet." Samuel nodded, sipping the thin coffee. His thoughts turned to his workshop, to the partially completed dining table commissioned by an English family in Philadelphia, to the tools passed down through generations, to the patterns and jigs that represented decades of refined technique. "Water damaged everything it touched." "You're thinking about your work," Ruth observed. After 52 years of marriage, she read his thoughts with ease. "Just wooden tools," Samuel replied, though they both knew it was far more than that. "We are safe. That's what matters." Across the gymnasium, Clint Eastwood sat with Sarah Yoder's children, who had become inadvertent celebrities among the other Amish youth once word spread about their famous rescuer. Despite their traditional upbringing, which discouraged interest in entertainment figures, the extraordinary circumstances had created an exception. 14-year-old John, his arm now properly set and casted by emergency medical personnel, was particularly entranced. "Have you been in many floods before?" he asked Eastwood. "A few," the director acknowledged. "Filmed in some tough conditions over the years." "What's California like?" 10-year-old Hannah inquired, her natural curiosity temporarily overriding the reserved manner typical of Amish children around outsiders. Eastwood considered his answer carefully, aware that the children's mother and other community members were within earshot. He had no desire to glamorize or promote the very world the Amish had chosen to separate themselves from. "Different," he said finally. "Not better or worse, just different." This diplomatic response earned an approving nod from Sarah, who had been listening nearby while tending to little Eli, who had finally fallen asleep after the trauma of the night. Bishop Miller approached the group, his normally austere expression softened somewhat by the shared ordeal. "Mr. Eastwood, if I might have a word?" The director excused himself from the children and followed the bishop to a quieter corner of the gymnasium. Samuel, noticing this, joined them at Ruth's gentle urging. "Our community owes you a debt of gratitude," Bishop Miller began formally. "Lives were saved through your assistance." Eastwood shook his head slightly. "I just helped where needed. Anyone would have done the same." "Perhaps," the bishop allowed, "but not everyone would have had the skills or—" He hesitated, searching for the right word. "The courage to act as you did." Samuel nodded agreement. "Entering that barn when it was collapsing, many would have hesitated." "The situation required action," Eastwood replied simply. His aversion to elaborate praise was evident. Bishop Miller studied him thoughtfully. "You mentioned being helped by an Amish family once. May I ask when this occurred?" Something shifted in Eastwood's expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxing of his customary reserve. 1951, he said after a moment. "I was 21, driving cross-country for a screen test in Hollywood. Car broke down outside an Amish settlement in Ohio, had maybe $5 to my name and no way to pay for repairs." Samuel and the bishop listened attentively as Eastwood continued, his gravelly voice dropping lower, almost as if sharing a confidence. "An Amish man, Yoder was his name, come to think of it, found me trying to fix it myself on the roadside. Brought his sons to help. When they realized the car needed parts I couldn't afford, they insisted I stay with them, while they arranged repairs through an English friend who owned a garage." Eastwood paused, looking past them toward the gymnasium's high windows, where morning light now streamed in. "Spent 3 days with that family. They asked for nothing in return, though I helped with farm work as best I could. When it was time to leave, they refused payment. Said helping strangers was simply what was expected when someone was in need." The significance of this story wasn't lost on either Amish man. Their community lived by precisely such principles, even as they maintained separation from the wider world. "So you saw last night as repaying that debt?" Bishop Miller asked. Eastwood shook his head. "Not a debt, more like passing along what was given freely." Before the conversation could continue, the gymnasium doors swung open. Jacob entered with several other young Amish men, all bearing evidence of having waded through floodwaters. Their expressions telegraphed serious news. Samuel hurried to meet his grandson. "The farm?" he asked without preamble. Jacob's face was grim but composed. "The house stands, though water reached the first floor. The barn is largely intact, but—" He hesitated. "The workshop?" Samuel prompted, already knowing the answer from Jacob's expression. "I'm sorry, Grossdaddy. The creek undercut the foundation. Half the building collapsed into the water." Samuel absorbed this blow stoically, though Ruth, who had joined them, placed a supportive hand on his arm. The workshop had been more than a place of business. It was where Samuel had taught his sons and grandsons the craft, where he connected to his own father and grandfather through techniques and tools handed down through generations. "And the clock?" Ruth asked quietly, referring to the family heirloom crafted by Samuel's father. "We found it," Jacob replied. "It was floating in the kitchen. The case is damaged, but it might be repairable." "What about the other farms?" Bishop Miller inquired, focusing on the community's broader situation. Jacob reported that damage was extensive throughout the valley. The Yoder farm had suffered particularly severe impact, with both house and barn significantly compromised. Several other families had lost outbuildings or livestock, though miraculously, no human lives had been lost in their community. The English authorities are saying it's the worst flooding in 40 years, Jacob concluded. They're bringing in more help, but many roads are still impassable. As this sobering assessment was shared with the gathered families, a new reality began to dawn. Recovery would not be a matter of days, but weeks or even months. For a community that prided itself on self-sufficiency and separation from outside assistance, this presented both practical and philosophical challenges. Bishop Miller called the community elders together to discuss their approach. Samuel, as one of the respected senior members, joined the circle of men. To everyone's surprise, the bishop also gestured for Eastwood to join them. Mr. Eastwood has experience with managing difficult situations, Bishop Miller explained to the questioning glances, and he has earned the right to be heard if he wishes to speak. This unprecedented inclusion of an outsider, particularly one from such a different world, in their council, reflected the extraordinary circumstances. Eastwood accepted the invitation with quiet dignity, careful to position himself slightly outside the inner circle of elders in subtle acknowledgement of his guest status. Our most immediate need is to assess each property, one elder began, determine what can be salvaged and what must be rebuilt, and where our people will stay until homes are habitable again, another added. Bishop Miller nodded agreement. The English authorities have offered continued shelter here, but I sense most families would prefer arrangements within our community if possible. Those with undamaged homes on higher ground could take in those displaced, Samuel suggested. Our house, if it is as Jacob described, could house another family once we've cleaned the first floor. The discussion continued in this practical vein, with the men mapping out immediate priorities: securing temporary housing for all community members, salvaging what possessions could be saved, and beginning the process of rebuilding damaged structures. Throughout the conversation, Eastwood remained silent, listening intently. Only when directly addressed by Bishop Miller did he offer any input. In your experience with disasters, Mr. Eastwood, what considerations might we be overlooking? Eastwood considered the question carefully before answering. Documentation, he said finally. For insurance purposes or government assistance if your community accepts such things. This prompted some uncomfortable shifting among the elders. The Amish generally avoided government programs and carried only minimal insurance, preferring to rely on mutual aid within their community. We do not typically seek outside assistance of that nature, Bishop Miller explained. Eastwood nodded, understanding. In that case, coordination becomes even more important. Establishing priorities, allocating resources, tracking who needs what. This practical advice aligned well with the Amish approach to community challenges. Several elders nodded approval at the suggestion. As the meeting concluded, plans were made for small groups to return to each affected property as soon as floodwaters receded enough to allow safe passage. Priority would be given to salvaging perishable food stores, securing livestock that had survived, and retrieving essential personal items. When Samuel returned to where Ruth waited with Sarah Yoder and her children, he found Miriam had joined them. His sister was deep in conversation with a Red Cross volunteer, discussing medical supplies for those with minor injuries and exposure symptoms. Samuel, Ruth said as he approached, the English doctor says Daniel's leg will need surgery. They're taking him to the hospital in Lancaster. This news underscored the severity of the situation. Such medical intervention went beyond what the community could provide internally, necessitating further engagement with the outside world. His wife and kinder? Samuel asked, using the Pennsylvania Dutch word for children. They're staying with her sister's family in Strasbourg, Miriam replied. Their farm was on higher ground and suffered minimal damage. As the morning progressed, more information filtered in about the extent of the flooding. Emergency management. Officials provided updates to the shelter residents, describing widespread damage throughout Lancaster County. Roads remained closed in many areas. Power outages affected thousands. and several English communities had been evacuated. Samuel found himself watching Eastwood during these briefings. The Hollywood director listened attentively, but with the critical assessment of someone evaluating information rather than merely absorbing it. Occasionally, he would ask incisive questions that cut to the heart of practical matters, revealing a mind accustomed to breaking complex situations down to manageable components. Around midday, a commotion at the gymnasium entrance drew everyone's attention. A film crew had arrived, camera operator, sound technician, and a reporter with the polished appearance of television news media. They began setting up equipment just inside the doors. The Amish families reacted with immediate discomfort. Many turned away, shielding their faces from potential photography. The community's religious beliefs prohibited posed photographs or video recording, viewing them as graven images forbidden by biblical commandment. Bishop Miller moved quickly to intercept the news crew, but before he reached them, Eastwood was already there. With quiet authority that required no raised voice, he engaged the reporter in conversation, occasionally gesturing toward the Amish families. Though too distant to hear the exchange, Samuel could read the body language well enough. The reporter initially seemed resistant, then surprised, and finally respectful. After a brief negotiation, the crew packed up their equipment and retreated to cover the story from outside the building. When Eastwood rejoined the group, Bishop Miller regarded him with newfound appreciation. "You explained our ways to them?" "Just suggested there were plenty of flood stories to cover without intruding where cameras aren't welcome," Eastwood replied with characteristic understatement. "Most reporters are reasonable when approached directly." This intervention further cemented Eastwood's unusual position with the community, neither fully insider nor typical outsider, but something unprecedented in their experience. As afternoon approached, emergency officials announced that some roads had become passable enough for families to return home if they wished, though they advised continued caution around flood-damaged areas. The Amish community began organizing their departure, eager to assess their properties firsthand and begin recovery efforts. Samuel found Eastwood gathering his few possessions, the clothes he had arrived in, now dried but still bearing flood stains, and the small personal items that had survived his pocket's immersion: the compass, whistle, pocket knife, and wallet. "What are your plans?" Samuel asked. Eastwood glanced out the window at the parking lot where emergency vehicles and relief workers' cars clustered. "Rental cars probably a total loss. I'll arrange for another, head back to my hotel in Lancaster if it's accessible." Samuel hesitated, then made an unprecedented offer. "Our home has damage, but the second floor is intact. We have space if you need somewhere to stay while you arrange your affairs." The invitation hung in the air between them, extraordinary, in its breaking of normal boundaries between the Amish and the outside world. Both men recognized its significance. "Appreciate the offer," Eastwood replied after a thoughtful pause, "but I wouldn't want to impose further." "It would not be an imposition," Ruth said, having approached quietly during their conversation. "It would be an honor, after what you did for our community." Before Eastwood could respond, Jacob joined them with news. "The English authorities say there's a convoy heading toward Lancaster in 30 minutes. Anyone needing transportation can join." A decision point had arrived. Eastwood looked between the 3 Lapp family members, then past them, to where other Amish families were preparing to depart. "Let me help with the cleanup first," he said finally. "Then we'll see about arrangements." Ruth nodded approval at this compromise while Samuel extended his hand in the traditional manner of sealing an agreement. Eastwood's firm handshake completed the pact. The convoy to the Lancaster area departed as promised, carrying a mix of emergency workers ending their shifts, displaced English residents, and Amish families whose farms lay in that direction. The vehicles, a school bus, several vans, and a few private cars cleared for the journey, formed a careful procession through roads still showing significant flood damage. The shelter lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the gymnasium. The air smelled faintly of sweat, wet wool, and strong coffee. Though the storm had passed and morning light filtered through the high windows, the tension hadn't broken. The Lapp family and the rest of the Amish community had spent the last 12 hours grappling with the flood's destruction. But for Clint Eastwood, something deeper stirred. An old memory, long buried, that clawed its way to the surface. He stood by the window, watching trucks from the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency come and go. Firefighters passed out bottled water and MREs. Children, Amish and English alike, huddled together on sleeping bags, whispering about the night's events like ghost stories. But Clint wasn't listening. His hand rested in his pocket, fingering the brass compass, still damp from the storm. He wasn't sure if the memory had come because of the rescue, the weight of Samuel's stare, or the quiet gratitude in Sarah Yoder's voice. He'd been 21 when it happened. Stranded in Ohio. A storm that night, too. A barn. A fire. A boy. No, 2 boys. One of them had drowned. The other had disappeared into the night. Clint hadn't spoken of it in decades, not even to his wife. But here, among the Amish again, the smell of hay and kerosene and stormwater seemed to awaken it. He didn't know how to begin telling Samuel. He didn't know if he should. Samuel Lapp sat on a folding chair with Ruth beside him, rubbing her wrist where arthritis had stiffened the joints. A Red Cross volunteer offered her a Tylenol, which she declined with a smile. Samuel wasn't listening to the bustle of the shelter either. He was watching Eastwood. "That man carries something heavy," he muttered. "They all do," Ruth replied, meaning the English. "But yes, he more than most." Samuel rose slowly and walked toward Clint, who stood staring at the compass in his hand as if it held the past like a photograph. "You've been here before, haven't you?" Samuel asked. Clint didn't flinch. "Not this town, not this community, but yes, a long time ago." Samuel nodded slowly. "You said once an Amish family helped you. What did you mean?" Clint hesitated. Then he turned, face carved deep by time and memory. "There was a fire. It was 1951. I was headed to California. My car broke down in Wayne County, Ohio. A family took me in. Name was Yoder." Samuel stiffened. "Yoder?" Clint nodded. "They had 2 sons. One was about 15, the other maybe 10. The barn caught fire in the night. One boy died. The younger one vanished. Sheriff ruled it an accident, but I never stopped, wondering." Samuel's lips parted, his breath catching. "That was my wife's cousin, Sarah's uncle. You were there?" Ruth, who had approached behind Samuel, froze. "My father told me that story," she said. "The boy who vanished, his name was Eli. They thought he ran away. The family said he couldn't live with the guilt, but no one ever knew. I tried to go back," Clint said softly. "A week later. But I couldn't find them. No house, no barn, just ruins. And no one would speak to me." Samuel's eyes darkened. "After the fire, they moved to Illinois, changed their name. It was shameful. The elders didn't understand a child running. Amish boys don't do that." "He saved my life," Clint said. "That boy pulled me out of the burning barn. I was passed out from smoke. He got me out, then went back for the horses. He never came out again." The silence that followed was thick. "He might still be alive," Ruth said softly. "If he changed his name, if he joined the English. I'd know his face," Clint replied. "I've looked in thousands. Never found it." Samuel sank back into his seat. "This changes things." Clint turned to him. "How so?" "You didn't just help us last night. You helped us finish something started 70 years ago. Maybe God brought you back so we could finally close that circle." Ruth nodded. "It explains your instinct, why you didn't hesitate." A new thought struck Samuel. "Sarah, she doesn't know this." Clint turned pale. "She was born after the fire?" "Yes, but if she hears that name, Eli—" "We'll have to tell her," Ruth said. "Not now, but soon." That afternoon, as floodwaters receded, small groups returned to assess the damage. Samuel, Ruth, Jacob, Clint, and Sarah made their way back to the Lapp farm. The air was heavy with humidity and the scent of silt and sodden earth. As they approached the workshop, Clint stopped short. The building had collapsed completely. Only the clock remained, its cracked face frozen at 9:03 the moment the creek broke its bank. Clint picked up the clock, wiping away mud with his sleeve. "This your father's?" he asked. Samuel nodded. "He carved every piece by hand. Spent months on it, said time should be honored." Clint gently turned it over. Inside, faintly scratched into the wood, was a signature. E. Yoder, 1944. Clint went still. "Eli," he whispered. Samuel took the clock, stunned. That's the boy. That's his handwriting. He made this." "He didn't die in the fire," Clint said, stunned. "He must have come back before he ran, or made it before he was sent away." Sarah approached, curious. "What is it?" Ruth stepped forward quickly. "Sarah, there's something we need to tell you. About your family. About a boy named Eli." As they spoke, Sarah's face turned ashen. Her hands trembled. "I have a letter," she said suddenly. "Passed down through my father. I never knew what it meant. But he said to keep it hidden. Come." They followed her to the remnants of her home, now mud-soaked and half-broken. In a cedar chest lined with oilskin, she produced a yellowed envelope addressed to S.Y., in ink so faded it was almost invisible. Inside was a single page. "Sarah, I am not dead. I could not stay. I broke too many rules, asked too many questions. They said I brought shame. I changed my name. I live in California now. I build furniture still, as our father taught us. My hands remember what I cannot speak aloud. If you ever meet someone named Clint Eastwood, ask him if he remembers the fire." Everyone was silent. Sarah stared at the page for a long time, then looked up at Clint. "He knew you'd come back someday." Clint looked stricken. All these years, he lived, he worked, he remembered. Ruth nodded. "Your lives were bound the moment he saved you. Now he's given you one more gift, closure." Samuel put his hand on Clint's shoulder. "And through him, maybe you were always meant to save us." That night, under stars finally free of cloud, the Lapps hosted the first gathering on their farm since the storm. Neighbors brought what food they had. Tables were set under lanterns. Damaged but standing, the Lapp house became a symbol of survival. Bishop Miller arrived quietly, dressed in dark broadcloth and a humility as deep as the land he shepherded. He approached Clint Eastwood with gravity. "The Council of Elders has spoken. You will not be remembered as an outsider. Your name will be entered in the logbook of the community's history, as one who brought aid, risked his life, and honored our memory." Clint was speechless. Jacob stepped forward, offering a simple wooden plaque. "To the man who came with the storm and stayed until the silence returned." Clint took it, eyes damp. "I didn't come to be remembered." Samuel shook his head. "But you are." Above them, the wind shifted. A calm one this time. And for the first time in decades, Clint Eastwood felt a weight lift. A fire finally extinguished. A boy named Eli had vanished into the storm of another century. And through that loss, something had been reborn. The morning after the gathering brought a soft golden light to the soaked land of Lancaster County. Steam rose from the wet fields and birds sang hesitantly as if unsure the storm had truly passed. But for Clint Eastwood, the air still felt heavy with something unfinished. He sat on the porch of the Lapp home beside Samuel, the wooden clock, still, broken, between them. "I've been in war zones, movie sets, Hollywood boardrooms," Clint said, his voice low and weathered. "But last night when Sarah read that letter, I don't think anything ever hit me quite like that." Samuel nodded slowly. "Eli was a ghost in this community. Not talked about. Not mourned properly. You've given us a name again. A face." Clint leaned forward, running his fingers along the clock's cracked frame. "But there's still work to do. That storm was only the beginning," Samuel finished. Below them, the farm bustled with recovery efforts. Men carried debris from collapsed buildings. Women sorted salvageable linens and canned goods. Children, usually tasked with schoolwork or chores, carried buckets and fetched tools. The Amish way, no time wasted on sentiment when work remained. But now, decisions needed to be made, difficult ones. In the Lapp family kitchen, Bishop Miller, Ruth, Miriam, and several elders gathered with Clint, Samuel, and Sarah Yoder. A map was unrolled across the large oak table, water-stained but legible. Red pencil lines marked the flooded regions. Some areas had been wiped clean. Others, like Sarah's and the Millers, suffered partial damage. The Lapp farm, high on its ridge, had become a temporary hub. Bishop Miller addressed the room with the solemn cadence of a sermon. "We've always rebuilt, but this time there are choices to be made." Clint nodded. "Let's talk priorities." Sarah looked weary, but resolute. "We don't have time or materials to do everything at once. My barn's gone, half the livestock drowned. I'll help wherever I can, but I can't rebuild alone." Jacob, who'd returned from helping with a collapsed bridge, added, "Some families want to leave. Go west to cousins or relatives in Ohio. Others want to stay, but they're scared." Miriam spoke next. "Fear is natural, but if we scatter, we lose what makes us whole. We've endured worse." Bishop Miller turned to Clint. "You've led men before. You've organized chaos. If you were one of us, how would you lead this?" Clint didn't speak immediately. He studied the map. His film director's eye read it like a shot list. Location, lighting, terrain, sequence. Then he leaned forward and tapped the paper. "You've got 3 zones. High ground, like this farm, can be a command and supply post. Middle ground, partially damaged, can be triaged. Low ground's a loss for now. Don't rebuild there until the waters recede fully and soil is tested. You'll waste time, labor, and lives." Samuel's brow furrowed. "That's not how we've done it before. And storms didn't used to be like this either," Clint replied. "You can't face a new storm with old rules." Bishop Miller looked at the others. "We must decide. Modern tactics within our values." Ruth placed a hand on her husband's arm. "Let him lead. We can learn from the outside without losing who we are." Clint stood. "Then we begin now." The next 4 days were unlike anything the valley had seen. Clint's plan rolled out like a battle campaign. The Lapp barn became the logistics center. With Dave Kramer's help, supplies were routed from town. Everything was tracked by hand. Ledger books, hand-drawn schedules. No cell phones, no radios. Only runners, young Amish boys and girls dispatched, with written messages and updates. Jacob led a rotating team to clear roads using only hand tools and draft horses. When one of the bridges gave way under a cart, he engineered a makeshift raft crossing using barrels, ropes, and fence rails, based on Clint's river rescue model. Sarah coordinated housing for displaced families. She transformed her damaged home into a communal kitchen using salvaged stoves and foodstuffs. With Miriam, she also set up a field infirmary for those who'd taken ill from exposure or contaminated water. Samuel managed morale. He and Bishop Miller made daily rounds, visiting every farm still standing. They prayed with families, offered advice, and shared updates. Their presence reminded the community of its core. And Clint? He was everywhere, hauling beams, drafting sketches for barn supports, adjusting pulley systems with the precision of a gaffer on a film rig. He didn't issue orders like a Hollywood boss. He listened, suggested, guided. He also kept something in his pocket, the letter from Eli, folded carefully, read privately. Sometimes he'd glance at it before bed. Other times he'd show it to someone, a teenage boy on the edge of Rumspringa, a grieving widow, a stern elder. Each time it sparked something, a recognition that change and tradition could coexist. On the 5th night, storm clouds rolled in again. Not a violent front, but a symbolic warning. Everyone gathered inside the Lapp barn for a council. Candles lit the space. The wood creaked in the breeze. Straw-scented air mixed with sweat and tension. Clint stepped forward. "We've done more in 5 days than most towns do in 5 weeks. But the hardest part isn't the rebuilding. It's deciding what we carry forward. The barn fell silent. I'm not Amish, Clint continued. Never will be. But I've seen what you can do with bare hands and steady hearts. What I've also seen, over decades, is that refusing to adapt is its own kind of pride. He turned to Jacob. You're in your Rumspringa, that means a choice, stay or go. Same with this community. This storm was a test, not just of strength but of spirit. Jacob stood slowly. We want to stay, but not if it means breaking ourselves trying to restore what's already gone. Bishop Miller nodded gravely. We must preserve the soul of our way, but maybe the frame can be rebuilt. Stronger. Samuel rose last. My father's clock broke that night, hands frozen at the moment the waters came. For days, I saw it as a sign of what we lost. Now I think, maybe it's a sign of where we begin. He looked at Clint. We move forward. We rebuild smarter. We listen to each other. Clint said nothing, but the look in his eyes, respectful, quiet, resolute, spoke volumes. Outside, thunder rumbled distantly, but the rain never came. That night, Ruth found Clint standing by the broken clock on the porch. She joined him, silent. I still don't know if Eli's alive, he said finally. But you honored him, Ruth replied. You gave him back to us. Clint nodded. And maybe that's enough. Ruth glanced at the clock. Do you want it? To take with you? He shook his head. It belongs here. Then he looked out over the valley. Fields still soggy, trees bent, fences gone, but people standing, working, rebuilding. Tomorrow, he said, we put up the first new frame. Yes, Ruth agreed. And tomorrow we begin again. The morning sun pierced through a thin veil of mist, casting long golden shafts across the scarred valley. Clint Eastwood rose early as he always had, but today something felt different. The air was electric with potential, like the valley itself held its breath. Today would test everything they had planned, every strategy, every compromise between tradition and adaptation, every bond forged in the fire of disaster. Today they would raise the new barn. But the day would bring more than timber and sweat. It would test the community's soul. Preparations began before first light. A convoy of wagons creaked toward the Lapp property, laden with hand-hewn beams, salvaged hardware, iron brackets, food for the workers, and benches for the women and children who would keep rhythm with song and prayer. Horses stamped impatiently as if eager to be part of something greater than the daily plow. Jacob Lapp stood at the edge of the clearing, studying the blueprint Clint had helped sketch, modern proportions subtly merged with traditional design. Reinforced trusses, drainage elevation, fire break buffers. The elders had reluctantly agreed to these innovations. This barn, Jacob said aloud, though no one was near him, will last 100 years. Samuel Lapp, approaching from behind with Ruth on his arm, overheard. Only if built with love, not just lumber. Jacob nodded. We have both. Clint arrived with Sarah Yoder. They had spent the night preparing a breakfast service and organizing tool supplies. Sarah had become something of a bridge, someone both traditional and forward-thinking, admired for her quiet strength. Her home, half demolished, now operated as a distribution hub. We have 30 men confirmed, Sarah told Clint. More arriving by mid-morning. We'll need coordination. We've got it, Clint replied. He pulled a weathered notebook from his coat pocket and handed it to her. Crew list, staging plan, rotation schedule, hydration breaks, and the song list for the noon hour. Samuel said singing gives rhythm. Sarah took it, blinking. You think of everything. Movies teach logistics, Clint said with a half smile. You try filming a cavalry charge with 60 extras and a crane shot without a plan. Sarah laughed, the sound rare but rich. I never thought I'd be quoting a film director in a barn raising. And I never thought I'd build one, Clint said, his voice suddenly quieter. By 9 a.m., the clearing buzzed with coordinated activity. Beams were laid out like ribs along a giant skeleton. Teams moved in rhythm, some chanting old hymns to keep tempo. Clint watched from a distance, clipboard in hand, pacing like a battlefield commander, intervening only when needed. Jacob took the lead on the main frame. He'd emerged over the past week as a natural leader, not the kind who shouted orders, but one who inspired others to follow. "Lift! Now! Keep it even!" he shouted as a group of 10 men raised the first corner post. It groaned, hesitated, then locked into the joint with a satisfying thump. The crowd applauded. Some wept. This wasn't just a barn. It was hope made visible. But hope rarely comes without interruption. Just after noon, as the main frame stood upright and men began fastening the crossbeams, a convoy of black SUVs pulled up along the dirt road. They bore the insignia of the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. Clint stiffened immediately. "Uninvited guests," he muttered. Samuel approached him. "You know them?" "I know the type." 4 officials stepped out, wearing government windbreakers and carrying clipboards. The eldest, a woman with steel-gray hair and a no-nonsense gait, made straight for Clint. "Mr. Eastwood, I'm Deputy Commissioner Wallace. We need to speak." Clint didn't move. "This is private property. Under emergency conditions, all river-adjacent land is subject to provisional review," Wallace said. By now others were gathering: Samuel, Bishop Miller, Ruth, Sarah, Jacob. Wallace continued, "There's a temporary moratorium on new structural construction in Zone C4. This site is under review due to proximity to the failed levee system. Any building could void federal disaster relief eligibility for the entire valley." A silence fell. "You're saying if we raise this barn," Jacob asked, "you'll deny aid to everyone else?" Wallace looked apologetic but firm. "It's not personal, it's regulatory." "You're threatening to starve us into compliance," Samuel said, voice low and bitter. "No," Wallace said. "We're trying to protect you from future loss. Another flood could wipe this out. We need environmental assessments, soil testing, hydrology reports. That takes weeks, maybe months." Clint's jaw tightened. "They don't have weeks. This barn feeds 20 families. If you raise it today," Wallace replied, "you could invalidate more than you know. Insurance, FEMA grants, state funding." Bishop Miller stepped forward. "We have raised barns for 200 years, without permits, without funding, without failure." "Times have changed," Wallace replied. Samuel turned to Clint. "What do we do?" Everyone looked to him. Clint sighed, stepped forward, and faced Wallace. "You've got 2 choices," he said. "You can stand aside while we save a way of life, or you can try to stop us and explain to CNN why you bulldozed a barn in front of children." Wallace blinked. "Is that a threat?" "No," Clint said. "It's a scene, and I've directed better ones." For a moment it seemed the tension would explode, but then Wallace gave a curt nod. "We'll observe, document, but we will not interfere physically." Clint gave a sharp nod. "Then enjoy the show." The barn raising resumed with renewed energy. The arrival of outside authority had lit a fire under the community. Men lifted with more strength. Women sang louder. Even the children ran faster. The sun climbed. The structure took shape. By late afternoon, the roof trusses were in place, casting long shadows across the clearing. Bishop Miller led a prayer beneath the new rafters. "This is not wood," he said. "It is the will of a people who remember who they are and what they may yet become." Clint stood beside him, head bowed but eyes scanning the structure, checking for stress, wind load, cross-bracing. Then came the wind. It hit suddenly, an unexpected gust from the east, a warning of storms over the next county. The new barn groaned. "Support the northeast beam," Jacob shouted. One of the ropes securing the crossbeam snapped. A rafter shifted. Clint sprinted to the frame. He didn't shout. He acted. "Samuel! Jacob! Get under and brace with the A-frame." They obeyed instantly. Clint climbed the side post like a seasoned grip scaling a lighting rig. He grabbed the free rope and lashed it to a steel spike, anchoring it to the frame. A hammer flew through the air Sarah had thrown it. Clint caught it mid-air, drove the spike, and stabilized the beam. The barn settled. The wind passed. The crowd burst into cheers. But Clint didn't smile. He climbed down slowly, breath ragged. "That's why the braces matter," he said, "modern or not." Samuel approached. "You saved it." "Not alone," Clint said. "No one does this alone." At dusk, the barn stood complete. Children ran beneath its beams. Women lit lanterns. Men washed their hands in buckets and gathered for a meal served at long planks set over sawhorses. As the stars emerged, the singing began again. Old Amish hymns, some about hardship, others about grace. Sarah found Clint sitting on the porch. "You should be with them," she said. "I am," Clint replied. She sat beside him. "There's one more thing, the letter. I showed it to my uncle, who arrived today. He was close to Eli." Clint looked up. He thinks Eli took a new name. Opened a carpentry business in California in the 60s. Had a family, a son. The shop closed in '94. "So he's gone?" Sarah nodded. "But he lived a full life. Left something behind." Clint looked at the barn, silhouetted against the stars. "So did we." Later that night, Jacob approached Clint as he prepared to leave. "I think I'm staying," Jacob said, "after Rumspringa. Not because it's safe, but because it's right." Clint smiled. "Then you're already a man." Samuel joined them. "Your room's ready, if you stay longer." Clint looked out over the valley, the barn, the people, the rising moon. "I'll stay a few more days. But I think this was the ending I didn't know I needed." Samuel nodded. "Sometimes God sends storms to bring things home." Clint looked at the broken clock now hanging on the rebuilt porch. "Maybe time does stand still," he said. "Just long enough to fix what matters." Morning broke over Lancaster County like a soft promise, the mist rising from the pastures and barns, as if the land itself was exhaling after holding its breath too long. The valley, though scarred and humbled, was alive again. The storm had passed, the barn stood tall, and something unspoken but lasting had shifted in the hearts of everyone who lived through it. Inside the Lapp farmhouse, Clint Eastwood stood by the wooden clock, still cracked and motionless, its hands forever stuck at 9:03, the hour the flood first swept through the lower fields. He touched the clock's face gently. It had not been repaired, and maybe it never would be. Maybe it wasn't supposed to be. Like Eli's letter, like the scar in the earth, it marked something sacred. A turning point. Downstairs, Ruth stirred breakfast as if nothing had changed, though everything had. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and fried apples. Miriam was already gone, off to tend to a family whose child had taken ill with exposure. Samuel sat reading a letter, one he had opened and reread a dozen times. "From the office of the governor," he said quietly as Clint joined him. "Acknowledging your role in emergency relief efforts, there's even talk of making this farm a case study in resilience." Clint raised an eyebrow. The irony. A case study in a place without phones or power. "And yet," Samuel said, folding the letter, "we endured. We adapted." They were joined by Jacob, his face bright with the calm energy of someone who had made a hard decision and found peace in it. "The bishop approved my letter," Jacob said. "I'll be baptized next week." Samuel's eyes shimmered. He clapped a hand on his grandson's shoulder, pride evident but unspoken. Ruth turned and smiled warmly. "And Sarah's children are already asking when they can come see the new calves. We may have more visitors than we know what to do with," she teased. Clint leaned on the windowsill, watching the light spill across the valley. "There's something about second chances, isn't there? Not just for places, for people." The barn had become a beacon, both literal and symbolic. Even families from nearby towns, some not Amish at all, came to see it. They brought questions, offers of help, and in some cases just gratitude. Sarah Yoder, now more deeply woven into the leadership of the community than ever, organized work, details and coordinated medical check-ins. Her children seemed steadier, older somehow, hardened but not broken by what they had seen. John, with his arm now freed from the cast, helped Samuel sort salvaged tools. Bishop Miller invited Clint to speak at the community gathering the next Sunday, not as a preacher, but as a witness. Clint declined the speech but sat on the wooden bench as the bishop recounted their story, not as one of tragedy but of grace. We were visited not just by a storm, but by a reminder that help can come in unexpected forms. Sometimes wearing broadcloth, sometimes denim, sometimes with a horse cart, and sometimes with a camera crew behind it. But always with the same spirit: to serve. Clint's departure came quietly. No grand farewell, no speeches, just one final sunrise. He packed the few clothes he had borrowed, folded Eli's letter into the inside pocket of his jacket, and placed the compass Jacob had returned into the glove box of the replacement rental car. Dry now, with mud still caked in the wheel wells. Samuel walked him to the edge of the drive. "You sure you won't stay through the next rain? Might be a gentle one." Clint chuckled. "You never know. I've learned to be cautious with storms." Samuel extended his hand. Clint took it firmly. "Thank you," the old farmer said. Clint shook his head. "Thank Eli." Ruth and Jacob joined them. Sarah stood just behind, arms crossed over a shawl, her children clustered beside her. "When you tell your story," Jacob said, "you'll remember us?" "Always," Clint replied, then added with a rare smile, "Might even change the names, but not the truth." Sarah stepped forward and handed him a small, wrapped bundle. "Open it later," she said. Clint gave a small nod and got into the car. As he drove away, he didn't look back until the road crested the ridge. Then he stopped. Below him, the valley stretched golden and green, the barn like a compass point in the morning light. Opened the bundle. Inside was a repaired wooden panel from the clock, now varnished and inscribed on the back, "To those who pause, not to stop time, but to remember it." Clint closed his eyes. Then he started the car and drove on. Weeks passed, then months. The barn became more than a symbol. It became a gathering place. Boys learned trades inside it. Girls painted quilts. Meals were shared. Agreements signed. Losses mourned. Births celebrated. The storm, once a memory of destruction, now marked a new year of grace. Jacob, now formally a member of the church, taught carpentry to younger boys, some from Amish homes, some from families that had once drifted from tradition and now returned, drawn by the story of the man who came with the rain. Sarah was asked to join the Elders' Planning Council, a rare honor for a woman, but not one without precedent. She accepted, as she always did, quietly and with purpose. Samuel and Ruth, their farm rebuilt with help from the community, resumed their work with more time spent on mentoring than labor. They walked the fields together in the evenings, speaking, softly, sometimes not at all. Miriam passed on that winter. Her last words were a blessing for the community, whispered in Ruth's ear, and the clock, still stopped at 9:03, was mounted in the new barn. Not to tell time, but to remind it. Clint Eastwood's film was never made, not the one he came to Pennsylvania to scout. He didn't return to Lancaster County with cameras or crews. But he wrote. He filled notebooks with sketches, dialogue, journal entries, and reflections. In an interview years later, when asked about his most meaningful experience outside of cinema, he spoke about the summer storm. "It's not the project you finish that defines you," he said. "It's the one that finishes you." The interviewer, pressed. "Will the public ever see it? A book? A documentary?" Clint just smiled. "Some stories belong where they happen, not where they're retold." Back in Lancaster County, years later, a young boy traced the carved letters beneath the barn. Clock. He was Eli Yoder's great-grandson, though he didn't know it yet. "Who fixed the barn?" he asked his teacher. The teacher smiled. "Many hands, one heart, and a man from far away who reminded us what it means to stand in the storm and not look away." The boy nodded. Outside, the wind picked up, but the barn stood firm. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.